We are going to be joined via Zoom by legal analyst Reitumetse Phiri to unpack today's court proceedings and the matter between former President Jacob Zuma and President Cyril Ramaphosa. Reitumetse, good afternoon. Thanks for your time here in the SABC.
It's a pleasure, Lisa. Good afternoon.
All right. So we're obviously seeing the legal showdown between former President Jacob Zuma and current President Cyril Ramaphosa. Perhaps to understand the context behind today's proceedings, you could talk to the build-up leading to this case.
Sure. So, I mean, the matter today is that the president has brought an application to set aside the nolle prosequi certificate as well as the summons, which enabled former President Zuma to launch these private prosecution proceedings against him. In respect of the nolle prosequi certificate, the former president is the president is essentially saying that it is unlawful and should be set aside because it is void. It was issued irrationally without him being heard, as well as being and the prosecution is for an ulterior purpose. However, his main argument, as we've heard today, is that the nolle prosequi certificate doesn't relate to him and any crime that he could have committed in respect of contraventions of the National Prosecuting Authority Act. And for that reason, the summons that Mr. Zuma issued to privately prosecute him did not relate to him and should therefore be set aside. So that's where we are in the proceedings. We obviously will hear Mr. Zuma's counsel, who would have started round about now. And, you know, the areas that he is likely to go to is to challenge the fact that the nolle prosequi certificate doesn't relate to the president. But it's going to be very hard because if you look at the terms of the nolle prosequi certificate, it's pretty clear that it doesn't relate to the president, and the only way you could construe it as such is if you have reference to extraneous documents, which would not be in a businessman-like and sensible manner, which the court is obliged to do in this particular respect. However, we will hear from him as he develops his argument this afternoon.
Reitumetse, on the back of what you just echoed, two other points came up during the arguments for the president. The former President Jacob Zuma having accused President Ramaphosa of being accessory to a crime. This was allegedly related to the incident between Advocate Billy Downer and Karen Moore. The gripe is that the president didn't investigate the complaint. There was also the issue of jurisdiction, looking at the parallel matters that was happening in the criminal court versus the civil court. Can you help us also unpack and understand that in relation to the arguments put forth?
Sure, and if we probably just start with the question of the president being an accessory after the fact. So what that crime entails is that once you are aware of a crime, you would then take active steps to ensure that it is not discovered or that the perpetrators of the crime would evade justice. So what Advocate Manage has argued on behalf of the president today is on any basis in which you choose to interpret the summons, the president could not be guilty of that crime because, in fact, what he did is when he received the complaint from Mr. Zuma or the request for him to investigate the matter further, he directed it to the relevant minister and also instructed the Minister of Justice to consider sending it to the Legal Practice Council, and he would have discharged his constitutional duties. Now, why that's an important argument in this context is because a basis upon which a person can stop a private prosecution would be if the private prosecution is for an unlawful purpose or an improper motive. And if you take that, the fact that it wouldn't disclose a crime, and put it together with the fact that the summons was issued on the eve of the ANC National Elective Conference, then you could easily come to an answer that the summons was issued for an improper purpose and therefore should be set aside. But that is an alternative argument, which is not the core of the argument that was advanced today, which really just speaks to the summons on their terms and the manner in which they're issued, which I think should be enough to get the president home on this one. But speaking of jurisdiction, And this is actually an important point to discuss, because this is exactly where Mr. Zuma exploits the law for his own purposes. The courts, and you would have heard a long string of cases starting from 1950 case, which have always held that, you can deal with an administrative process relating to a criminal matter outside of a criminal court, or rather, you don't have to challenge it under Section 106(1)(h) of the Criminal Procedure Act, which relates to title to prosecute. So merely because a decision to issue a nolle prosecute certificate or issue a summons takes place in the context of criminal law doesn't strip the nature of the issuing of those documents as being administrative acts. And if you consider that an administrative act that gives effect to a criminal process has to be lawful in and of itself, then you can see why the court would have jurisdiction, because the administrative act is not a criminal process. Yes, it gives effect to a criminal process, but the courts have been able to maintain that neat distinction for the years, and we heard that the Constitutional Court has not overturned that principle over 50 years. So instead of furnishing, evidence relating to the key factors for his compliance with Section 7(1) of the Criminal Procedure Act, which would allow him to get out of the starting gates to bring this private prosecution, what Mr. Zuma then tries to do is make this a matter about title to prosecute. And we can see why, because if he succeeds on that basis, then he can also succeed in illustrating that the courts have treated him differentially and have accorded him a different treatment to others. But frankly speaking, this is not a matter about title to prosecute. It's a matter about whether administratively the nolle prosecute certificate and the summons were validly issued. If it was a question about whether the prosecutor had valid title to prosecute, then he would be correct. But I think he's missing the point. And if he continues along that argument, he would have absolutely missed the nub of the president's case.
That matter is obviously going to continue. I think just for the interest of time, we're looking at the political game, perhaps also what's unfolding. How would you weigh in on what's also been put on that front? The former president, Jacob Zuma, being accused of ulterior motives, given the timing of the certificate that had been issued for President Cyril Ramaphosa. You've also got the former president arguing that President Cyril Ramaphosa harbors animosity towards him. Walk us through how these dynamics are also unfolding and impacting what's at stake.
I think it's interesting what we've seen in the affidavits from both the president and the former president. I think it reveals a lot in respect of their relationship and how they relate to each other within a political context. I think what will be probably fortunate for the court in this matter and not so fortunate for the public is the case won't be decided on that level. The case will really end at the question of, was the summons validly issued? And underpinning that question is whether the nolle prosecute certificate related to the president. I don't think the court will have to, at this particular point in time, decide the question of whether the private prosecution was started for an unlawful process or for an improper motive. I think if you look at the facts and if you look at the chronology, the chances are is that the private prosecution was issued for an improper motive, because as Advocate Manecha said, what changed between the president dealing with the matter and the summons being issued? In what way did Mr. Zuma feel that the president had taken a different stance to this? So I think that does reveal a shifting, or at least an improper motive on the part of Mr. Zuma, but the court is unlikely to make any findings on this. I think it will maybe have something to say, but insofar as what will be the crucial finding it will make, I don't think the matter will be elevated to that level.
Reitumetse, thank you for your time here on the SABC. We'll continue to monitor developments as it unfolds. Let's leave the conversation there for now, though. Legal analyst Reitumetse Phiri, and we're unpacking the matter between former President Jacob Zuma and President Cyril Ramaphosa. That's obviously before the High Court in Johannesburg today.